Welcome back. This will be the first conversation I have with a guy. I'm excited about it, nervous about it, because I have my own biases. I realised that moving into this episode because I was so shocked at how the conversation went with Ash, and I'm so happy with how it came out as well, because I have learnt some things. He's really challenged some of the views I have on what you can do and what you can bring to a relationship and how you bring it to a relationship. Really do hope you enjoy this. Thank you so much for listening. And also, with every conversation, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, I'm all ears. Just keep it kind. Thank you so much. You are the first male
representing
to have
all
a conversation. Yeah. The first male to have a conversation with me. Always kicking things off at the moment, MSN style. So we ask people their name, sexual preference, and relationship status in honor of the old age, sex, location from way back when.
Yeah.
You're looking at me a bit confused, like, what the fuck is that?
No, so I'm Ash, male, and been living in Birmingham, but moved around a lot. And my sexual preference, I'll classify myself as heterosexual straight, but I'm also, I'd say, fairly just open as a character. I don't like to necessarily put sexuality in a particular box as binary as that. So yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And relationship status?
Relationship status, yeah. So I'm in a relationship at the moment, and I am also separated, going through a divorce as well from previous relationship. So throw that one in there as well.
I believe someone else called that, if it was on Facebook, complicated.
Yes, I usually fall in a complicated status. I'd say it's fair to assume that with my relationships. So.
Yeah, that is, it's a whole thing. But I really want to actually, before we kick off, just say thank you so much for coming on, because you are the first guy to actually go ahead with a conversation with me. And I think the reason why I could fall into the trap of just speaking to women, because it's easy to do that. I'm a woman. Women are potentially more open to speaking about this stuff. But I thought that to really understand it from all kinds of sides, like all different places in relationships, intimate relationships, is that we have to listen to the guys and their experiences and how they interpret stuff. And I know that we're still in that space where there's that very masculine, don't talk about things, and you're riding on your white horse and fix everything and all this shit. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate that, because I think I even have my own biases on how guys probably interpret stuff. And also just because I'm not really well versed in the guy domain, being from like a household full of women, also a lesbian, really just not in my wheelhouse.
I get it. Yeah. And it's odd because even as a male, been in the male world growing up and been a heterosexual, it's hard because guys don't seem to share some of this stuff with each other. So it kind of feels like you're on your own a little bit, and you don't. I think that kind of shows as well as you start to go through sort of teenagers years and then your adulthood. You kind of start to realize that you probably aren't as developed or as comfortable yet, because you haven't had that time to share and explore and bounce stuff off. Whereas I find women definitely do that more. And I know I've definitely spent more time with my female friends where it's talking about how I feel, my emotions, my relationships, my preferences, sex, and things like that, rather than men. And when you talk to men, you get a real mixed look back from them. Kind of, they're slightly uncomfortable straight away, or actually uncomfortable, but up to a point, and you definitely see that. So it's an interesting one. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily fully versed then as a man either, but I don't think many men are. So,
to be honest, I mean, the conversations that I've been having, I don't think anybody's fully well versed in feelings and relationships, and that's actually been kind of eye-opening for me. But yeah, I guess the stereotype is that guys just don't. I mean, straight away though, it makes me want to ask, What's that like though? Being a guy growing up not really talking about your feelings. How the fuck do you then like process like your feelings? Like not just, let's not go all broad spectrum of feelings, but how do you then process when you like someone or you have feelings for someone or you experience heartbreak as a kid into adulthood if it's all kind of very siloed?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to do that. I think it's a bit of a journey. I think from what I've noticed and sort of looking back in hindsight, you can really see it's not as straightforward as you kind of just go out with your feelings or you don't. Is it? It can't be like that. It has to be a case of you feel something, you don't really know what to do with it. You try and share it, maybe. You kind of it didn't work. When you tried to share it, or maybe the other person wasn't receptive to it. Um, and you kind of go for that journey a little bit. And I think that also kind of ties in with how you develop to understanding what that feeling or emotion is. So, like, love's a great example of this. You only have a reference point, your parents, really, when you're growing up for what love is, and
Mm.
for good or bad. And what I find interesting is you kind of then see this kind of persona of love from movies and from Disney and whatever else
Hmm.
that's kind of like this is how perfect it should be, and then you're stuck in this middle, going, "Well, I've got this like thing called love, and I don't really know, what it is because I've
Yeah.
got two different things explained to me, but also I can't relate to that because I'm not feeling that in my natural interactions with people."
Mm.
And I think it's interesting how I think you start to develop kind of a view of what love is,
Hmm.
and that is usually based on interactions with the the, the person that you kind of start to fancy or like.
Yeah.
And I think those first interactions are really important to shaping it. I know with mine, when I first started liking someone, it's been like, wow, it's kind of like this is I'm in love straight away. And then
Yeah.
as you go through and go, actually, like it feels like it's not perfect, or it feels like it, actually I can't share how I feel, or actually the other person struggles on their side. They're also going for their journey, right? So you kind of start to get this feeling going, oh, I can't share stuff now, and
Mm.
you kind of close out
Yeah.
up again. And it's interesting how you suddenly start to go, oh, okay, maybe I'm not doing it right.
Okay. Yeah.
There's this real thing of maybe that's not what you do, because you don't have a reference point for that. And I noticed that the tipping point for me where I started to really get it was actually just share what you feel and see what comes back. You know,
Yeah.
you don't need the other person to actually validate that feeling. You don't need them to show you, oh yeah, that's you must be in love, or you either feel it or you're not, and you're not looking for anything from it. Then actually, what I
Mm.
found is people just start to share the feeling, and then you start to get a consensus, more of a consensus of actually people are in love or not in love, or this is what love feels like, or that it's not as straightforward as it originally seems, and everyone makes out to be. But you're aware of that now. And
Mm.
I'll be honest, it took me to mid-30s to kind of really get a sense of that and be comfortable enough to do that as a man. I think women, I
Yeah.
think generally I've noticed do it a bit younger, before 30s usually, but men, I think I know guys in their 50s who still really uncomfortable with this stuff, and I think it's
Mm.
partially because they've just never been able to share and open up about it, and they're expecting something back when they do, and they don't get it, and therefore they shut it down really quickly after that as a result.
Yeah. One, I feel like Disney and the film industry and all of that have like a lot to answer for in just how we've all kind of grown up in thinking about how relationships should go and falling in love and what that should be like. But what was the turning point for you? So you were in this state of play and then it started turning for you. What was that turning point for you?
So I think it's not just been one. I think there's been like a couple of sort of key points on that journey.
Mm.
I think the first one was I went to a private school as the only Asian in the school, and had
Mm.
it's when you start to get into your teens, you start to find people attractive, and I was bullied quite a bit
Mm.
by male peers predominantly, for race, or not fitting in, and so on and so forth.
Mm.
And that really knocked my I suppose, my confidence, and kind of took a
Yeah.
lot out of me. It really kind of shut me down as a man to open up to other men.
Mm.
People you thought you were friends with weren't there to support you when you're getting bullied. That kind of stuff. So you
Yeah.
automatically kind of realise, actually, I can't be open with these people. And so I guess I shut off from opening up with guys a lot, and I found that women were more just empathetic to me. And
Mm.
as a result, I kind of found it easier to speak to women, found women attractive, and then started fancying them. And I guess that first part of the journey was I started to open up to women, telling them I find them attractive, or want to go on a date with them, things like that. And then you get the rejection bit, which I think everyone goes
Mm.
through. They don't
Yeah.
like you back, and that was a big shock to me. And I think at that point, I kind of probably hit a bit of a rock bottom as a kid, and was not enjoying school. And I was like, right,
Mm.
okay, I've just become really insular. And I had this opportunity to go to college and almost reinvent myself and be who I want to be, who I think
Yeah.
people expect me to be. And so I did that. And so I kind of just went from being kind of insular to really outgoing, like, almost overnight. And as a result of that, I kind of just started to get on well with people, boys and girls. And
Mm.
that in itself kind of made me realize, actually, like, people do find me attractive. People do like spending time with me. I also do vibe off spending time with them. But I think that really changed how I interact and how much I open up with people. And I noticed in that period that if I open up and if I share, I think what they want to see,
Mm.
they will then open up back, and then you start to kind of build a relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether that's a natural relationship, or whether it's fairly platonic kind of thing. But and that kind of really shaped, I suppose, the next couple of years of my life, where you kind of interact with people, and you can, I suppose, started dating women on mass with going into uni, and I
Mm.
just realised that things like confidence, being able to be relatively open, are hugely attractive as a thing in a person, and and it also was quite nice to be free in a way. Um, but I realised during that journey, I'm not being me. I'm not being my authentic self. I'm being everything that everyone expects me to be, or trying to fit in with
Mm.
everyone. And so when I got into like my mid-20s, I'll be honest, I got into a bit of a pickle with, I was sort of dating multiple people and cheating. And
Oof.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of, it's an odd one because I've done it in my life, and I just like, I don't really want to hurt other people,
Mm.
but I clearly am doing this for a need, and I obviously after sort of growing up, you kind of realise why you're doing it. It's because I want that love to be reciprocated. I want acceptance. I want all these things that I probably am lacking, especially from my childhood.
Mm.
And so I started to realise that that's the barrier. I'm hitting this barrier when I'm in my sort of late 20s,
Mm.
where I'm not really building relationships with people, and therefore you can't really have a true loving relationship if you can't kind of expose yourself, make yourself vulnerable enough. But
Yeah.
how the hell you do that as a sort of a 30-year-old man is, God knows. And so it's taken me a while to kind of get to a place where I'm comfortable, where I don't need to seek that acceptance from other people and kind of do that. And I'll be honest, I went through counselling and stuff for helping with that. But as soon as I did that, it
Mm.
was a huge sort of pressure off me. I can interact with someone and not expect anything back, and usually as a result, people reciprocate. They
Yeah.
actually like the fact that you've been open. Um, it means your relationships go from being, you think you like someone and connecting with them, to really connecting with them. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a different game really. And when I started to do that, I started to realise, that's where it's at. And I think, and this is kind of the interesting thing about the whole journey. You kind of think you know what love is, or you know what deep friendships are, and then you get further into it and you go, actually, I don't really know. And then you kind of, that epiphany, that almost awareness then makes you go, right, you know, go back to sort of basics a little bit, go back to just being open, go, make yourself more vulnerable, see what happens. And
Mm.
that experimentation bit helps you find what you think it is then again. And then
Yeah.
it continues again for a bit. And I think it's kind of a bit of an evolving feast where, every sort of 5 to 10 years, you're kind of learning more about it. And even now, going into adulthood, you really what does love look like when you go through marriage and then have kids and then have potential to live a life with in a single relationship for 40 years. Like does
Mm,
it stay the same? I don't think so. I think most of the people I speak to seem to have quite differing views of what they think love is, and
yeah.
still trying to work it out, right? So
I feel like a lot of people are still trying to work that out, or even completely ignorant about it and just are not even aware of where they're at with their relationships. But I can imagine starting off with your experiences being like all the way back to being bullied and being so like on your own
yeah,
to now to, as you're saying, just kind of opening up and almost like just because they don't reciprocate, you're not going to die.
yeah,
And I imagine that's huge because when you're bullied, yeah,
yeah. I think that's one of the biggest epiphanies I've had, because I think you're always expecting something back. If you don't get something back, you're disappointed, or
mm,
you're a bit shocked, or maybe actually get something back and you kind of vibe off that, and you kind of a bit more sort of receptive to it. But um, that kind of self awareness is really hard to kind of acquire. And I noticed
mm,
that when you start to get to that point where you can feel, actually this works a little bit better than I thought it did, and then you start to go, right, I can now start to show some of my vulnerabilities a bit more. So it's kind of this snowball
yeah,
effect kind of happens with it, where if I make myself a little vulnerable, share a little bit more of myself, and actually nothing went wrong. Like,
mm,
actually, if anything, I got more respect off people for doing that, or people kind of appreciated it, the openness, and therefore
yeah,
I am actually getting more back from that interaction, and straight away it's going, right, now I feel empowered to do more of that, and it kind of just keeps going to a point where it's quite nice to be open. I found in the social group that I'm in, especially with the guys, actually, I think a lot of the guys just really do not open up like that to each other. I think
yeah.
if you get close to conversations like that, they kind of shut it down or deflect it really quickly.
Make a joke of it, bit of banter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And especially if you're in a group. I mean, God, if you're in a group, they will not do it at all. They just deflect so quickly. If you then catch the same person on your own and having a drink or something with them, and next thing you know, they're kind of open up exactly about it. And then if you put them back in the group and kind of say, oh, we had that conversation, again, it's just like it's never happened. And it's
yeah,
so weird how guys do that, where they don't feel they can be themselves in a group of guys, or even just with another guy. And I think I've noticed the people that seem to be um, more comfortable in their own skin have gone through a journey of it kind of not working for them. Being open hasn't worked for them. They've either been bullied, or they've kind of had negative
mm,
impact from the actions that came back from the other person, and that's affected them. They kind of hit a bit of a low, but then after they've kind of had to kind of do a bit of soul searching and work out, why am I upset by that? What is it that makes me not want to do that? And I think they've kind of come out
mm,
the other end. And as a result, I think, they're the people that you can see a mile off in a group, especially with guys. They're the ones who are more
yeah.
comfortable in their own skin. They're the ones who can share a feeling or take a joke on the chin and not have to, worry about it. And, they don't go and lose sleep over it. So,
Do you think I'm not gonna like try to say that you were probably quite an angry person because, but having been bullied as a child myself and knowing what it feels like to feel very kind of on your own,
mm.
I was pretty fucking angry like all the time. Do you think that that's kind of why guys are more angry and more kind of like prone to having that fly off the handle, like get into fights and stuff like that, is because they are actually just, it sounds a little bit, I guess, a little bit too therapy, a little bit too.
No, I hear what you're saying. I think there's probably a little bit of that. It's interesting. I wasn't necessarily angry actually as a kid.
Mm,
And what I think one of the reasons was there's no outlet for it. The more angry I was at school when I'm getting bullied, the more fights
mm,
would happen, and it just wouldn't go my way. So actually, it just didn't work for me, right?
yeah.
I had no other outlet, and actually, if anything, I became more passive and insular as a result of it. And
Mm,
even now, like I'm quite a sort of passive person. People start to be quite aggressive back to me. I've learned just to not give it anything. You, someone feeds off that. If there's anger in front of you
Mm,
and you kind of get angry back, they've got something to work with. If you give them nothing,
mm,
there's nowhere they can go for it, and it's clear who's got the issue. They're angry.
mm,
So it becomes almost self-fulfilling that you can see where the issue is
yeah.
and what it is. I do think, though, however, it's about the vulnerability bit. I think the anger masks the vulnerability. I think,
Mm,
um, or me being passive, for example, is masking. I'm not comfortable. Right, I'll pull back a little bit. And I think
yeah.
guys particularly probably focus on the anger part because
Mm,
kind of what's expected in society of them, to be the sort of alpha male and a sort of
yeah.
in a group or a pack.
Mm,
But actually, I think um, I think it's when you start to get to the fact they feel vulnerable by either sharing their emotions or they feel vulnerable because they are getting jealous and therefore it's clearly an issue that they're not comfortable, or
mm,
stuff like that. That's when I see it the most, and I do it too as well. I still have feelings like that. It's just I've probably learned to kind of recognize, oh, actually, I'm getting jealous, not because you know it's it's unnatural to. I mean, everyone gets that, right? But why? I start to ask the question of why. Why am I getting jealous? Is
mm,
it because I'm overreacting? Is it because actually I feel threatened? You know, and or is it because actually this is new and it's a bit of an unknown? And actually, maybe I should maybe just see where it goes a little bit. It takes a while to kind of temper that initial first reaction and kind of just say, okay, look, let's just try and understand it a bit and unpick it a bit. So,
that's really interesting, actually, because of all the conversations I've had so far, jealousy is not actually a word that's come up yet.
hmm.
So I don't want to be like, oh, is that because it's such a guy thing? Because I don't think it is. Again, I've been there myself. But have you been the jealous person? Like, and what is that? Is that like fear? Is that insecurity? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to an insecurity. I think, and I think for a lot of things, whether it's jealousy or whether it's you feel like you're angry and stuff, a lot of that goes back to an insecurity ultimately. I've noticed. So I think I get jealous when I feel threatened,
Mm,
and that threatening sort of position could be, if I'm with someone and I feel okay, I might lose them. It's completely because of my doing, and actually maybe they're just not into me as much as
yeah.
I'm into them, and therefore I feel kind of, oh god, I feel really exposed, vulnerable to them, and therefore insecure. And I think that then starts to make me quite anxious about, what if she sees someone that's quite attractive, and what happens if someone else comes along and just they seem to get on. It's been like that, and I think that's where the jealousy kicks in. But ultimately, it
Mm,
all goes back to that insecurity of maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not the right fit for this person, maybe that person's themselves aren't happy, and I can see they're not happy, and therefore
mm,
is it I feel like I'm going to lose them, so that kind of bit comes in. And I think the other bit um, is also when you start to kind of open yourself up, and maybe that person's not ready to open up yet, and you feel a bit insecure because of that. And it's not that
mm,
they're not willing to. It's just maybe it'll take them a bit more time to process what opening up looks like. And I know I've got that with my current partner, with Pip. I think the way we process our feelings and emotions is so different. Complete polar
yeah.
opposites, in fact. I'm really sort of like, I feel something, I'll throw it on the table and try to just, even if I understand it myself, I'll just kind of try to explain it and be really transparent about it. Whereas I think Pip, I think she has a feeling or emotion. She's kind of trying to work it out in her head. And until she's kind of got it clear in her head, she kind of keeps it in her head. And you
Mm,
can see it, you can see her mind whirling around, like
yeah.
you see she's thinking about something. And I'm saying, what's up? And she's like, nothing. And I'm being like, but clearly there's something up, like you've got that level of closeness in a relationship where
Mm,
yeah, I know there's something there. And it's interesting how that clearly is also her being insecure about putting it out there on the table, and just, for whatever reason, it's not been accepted, or, maybe she doesn't know what it is. And that's okay as
mm.
well, like, it takes a while to work out what we're really thinking for a while. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a really interesting one because I think there's always those. jokes around like women asking guys, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" And they're just like nothing. And actually, that you've got the reverse there, and it's really interesting because the energy that you have in relation to the energy that Pip has, and we Pip and I had a conversation as well, and actually it would have come out before this one, is so vastly different.
Mm.
Which makes me wonder, is it, that whole like opposites attract and stuff like that? Have you always been attracted to the kind of more, I don't know how to describe her really, because the only conversation I've actually had with her is this conversation.
Mm.
But she's comes across as quite confident, comes across as knowing what she wants, and says that she says what she wants. Whereas your energy is very calm, as you said, you're quite passive because you don't want to meet people with their energy, especially if it's like a negative energy. Kind of feels like my debt collection days on that, when they're shouting at you and you're like, don't shout, don't shout, don't
Yeah.
match them.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a conditioned thing, right? You
Mm,
that's taken a long time to kind of get to that place where you can go, actually, I'm not going to shout. I don't need to
mm,
shout. So it's kind of that's been acquired. I think I've always been attracted to people who are confident. I think confidence
mm,
just across the board is attractive. Um, I can give loads of examples where you could see someone who's not that sort of not your type person, but they just
mm,
ooze this confidence. And you're like, wow, it's just a natural attraction to them. I
yeah.
can give the example of where I'm a heterosexual man, and I can see another man who's like clearly just confident in themselves, confident in their own skin. Again, being like
Mm,
fair play. Like I can respect
yeah.
and kind of appreciate he's an attractive guy because of that. And I think that in itself, I think probably gets not enough sort of a look in when it comes to kind of when you first kind of interact with people. I've also, inverse though, been with really attractive people, and they just lack confidence and lack that kind of energy, I guess. And
Mm,
God, the attraction wears off pretty quick.
yeah.
You kind of get really early doors into a relationship, and then kind of like, well, there's nothing more to it, and so kind of that peters out quickly. So I think it's definitely a big thing in most relationships, and I think it's definitely something I look for in a partner. I think the one thing that I found interesting about it, and this is probably because of my own experience as well, and kind of discovering myself a little bit in the way that I am, is it took me a long time to understand. I was always putting this sort of this facade out of who I
Mm,
am, really confident with work, really, people kind of, I want people to like me, so I kind of do that and want to fit in, or I want to be an expert in my career, or whatever it is that's
mm,
driving that behavior. But you kind of always putting that on, but inside you are a little bit nervous. You are a little bit insecure.
yeah.
You are a bit lost. You don't know whether it's the right path or not, or you're not the expert you claim to be. You kind of you need that time to do that. And I kind of did that for a long time, pretty much throughout my 20s and 30s, early 30s, and I kind of just realized I was a bit like, it's okay not to be those things. And then and with
Mm,
that came letting go. But then I started to see it in everyone else. I started to see, actually,
mm,
there's so many people who put themselves out there, confident people. But when you get under the covers a little bit and you see that, you can see actually they're really insecure.
mm,
Um, the thing I find interesting is when you get someone who, when you have those conversations with them, whether they recognize that.
yeah.
Because there's a lot of people
Mhm,
who, when you start to kind of dig into that a little bit, you start to realize, wow, they don't realize they're still doing this because they're
yeah.
not comfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas when you find someone who kind of says, "Yeah, I'm not as confident, but like still carries on the outward facing world that they are like that," I think it's hugely attractive. I think for
Mm,
me, it's one of those things where actually that shows me someone who is confident, who's outgoing, who's fun, but at the same time also, you know, understands themselves. Has
yeah.
a level of self awareness, and doesn't have to be perfect, but that in itself is wow, like that's cool.
Yeah. 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 It is. You saying about those that speak a good game, but actually, but you can see it, and you're like,
Yeah.
do you really? Do you? I'm not sure about this. Yeah, see it all the time. See it all the time. And that's really interesting because, as you say, you've gone through a journey. And I was speaking to someone recently about their journey from, and maybe a bit of an extreme example, but their journey from alcohol to sobriety
Mm.
and how that shifted their relationships, fundamentally shifted everything for them. And has that affected your relationships? I know you say you're going through a divorce and things, but and you're now with Pip, but does that kind of, if you're in a relationship and you're on that journey, has that shifted that?
Yeah, totally. It has, and I see things like that as a bit of a kind of, there's two ways of looking at it. Really, there's the first of all, you can
Mm,
use it as escapism,
mm,
um, which largely is okay. It's not, it's a good way of doing it. To be honest, it's a good way of maybe if you're in a group of people, having a drink helps kind of
mm,
just relax a little bit. So it can be quite productive in a way, but there is a fine line between it tipping to this is now destructive.
mm,
And I found myself, for example, going out when I was in previous relationships, going out and kind of having a drink, and and then it started end up being, I'm doing it because I'm letting my hair down, but then it kind of ended up being going out and having more and meeting more people, and putting me in positions that potentially, you kind of look back and go, God, that's me crying out for help a little bit.
mm,
I'm clearly not happy where I am. I wouldn't be doing that if I was. And that's when it switched into that destructive mode. And the thing I
mm.
realized with that sort of stuff is you kind of realize that at the time you just can't see it because
Yeah.
it's just kind of gradually happening, or it just happens, and you kind of just go with it. But when you look back and go, God, that was me being this self-destructive, and having that epiphany that I'm being self-destructive, like, do I continue down this path,
Mm,
or do I actually address maybe why I'm being destructive? That is a huge thing, and I think most of the time, especially when I was younger, I probably would just carry on until it's destroyed whatever the situation is. I'm
mm.
either out of the relationship or actually kind of falls apart naturally anyway. Um, but I think now it's a bit more like, okay, I'm doing it, and it's probably quite a telling sign of what's going on. Is it because I'm too stressed? Or is it because is it because actually I'm not
Yeah.
communicating how I feel, and therefore I'm kind of using this as an outlet? Is it because I'm just letting my hair down, um, and I'm doing it constructively, and therefore I can take it, leave it, but you can definitely kind of get a better control of it if you kind of realise that there is a tipping point to being productive and destructive.
Mm, mm.
Um, and there's times where I've kind of come off, drinking and booze and whatever else because you know you just go, actually, no, I need to probably think about why I'm doing it, not
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm just going to keep going on. And I do miss it, but I must admit I do miss the socialising, the kind of like what it brings with it, rather than the
Mm.
actual uh, vice itself. So
Yeah. I know I stopped drinking last year at the end of January because I was like too much like, oh, I just want to get obliterated. But also because I kind of was putting the pieces together, realizing that a lot of my relationships started fueled by alcohol.
yeah,
And if I'm going to be honest and live the way I want to live, then maybe I need to kind of find those relationships, start those relationships sober, because it's sober me is a very different me
yeah.
to a drunk me.
No, and I get that, and I think I've started many relationships in a similar way. And
Mm,
I'm a big drinker, and I think one thing that I found interesting is I think before it used to be kind of you go out all the time. That's kind of you all the time,
yeah.
and therefore that you're almost selling this vision of who that person is to the mate that you've got there.
Mm,
Um, and that's not sustainable. It's just, you get to the point where you're like, I
yeah.
can't keep being that person. And I think
Yeah.
that's where it comes unstuck, right? And one thing I find interesting is it's it's in that period there where you start to realize, okay, is there a base for a relationship, or is this kind of just a short term
Mm,
thing where it works for a bit, but in reality, it's never going to kind of transition to that long term relationship. And I think that's the interesting bit. And I had this with Pip. weirdly, where we met, like you said, just going out drinking, quite sort of high
Mm.
octane kind of environment. But there was times I'm just like, actually, I just want to spend time with her, like
Yeah.
with or without the drink. And I just remember being in a place where I was just a bit like, I could take or leave this or go back and just spend the evening with her. And actually, I'm just happy doing both. Whereas I think in previous relationships, I'd be like, no, I actually want to stay out. I enjoy the kind of environment that I'm in, and
Mm.
it's the first time I've kind of gone, actually, I'm willing to kind of just let that go a little bit because I found someone I actually really want to spend time with.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's just getting older as well. That probably plays a part, of course, but um, I think there's a number of aspects like that that kind of were telling signs that I have found someone I really love.
Mm.
In like, I was quite a career person, for example.
Yeah.
Career has always been fairly at the forefront of most of my life, and then had my own businesses as well. So
Mm.
again, quite intense, taking on a lot of time and energy. Um, and for the first time, I was just like, actually, you know what? I'm happy just not spending all my time doing that and my energy doing that. I actually want to put a bit more time into my relationship. Whereas before, I think, if I was being honest with myself, I don't think I would have done that. I think it was always,
Mm.
I want to have a relationship because that's what people do, but I don't want to give the other stuff up because I really enjoy that. And that I was kind of, I suppose, in my head going, try and do both, but which never
Yeah.
works really. But yeah, the first time I've realised actually I want to prioritise my relationship over work or career or drinking or going out and stuff. So
What does that feel like to want to prioritize someone over everything else something that you've been doing for years and you identified with for years? What does it actually feel like?
um, initially, um,
I can
quite
feel like,
quite a relief.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it's quite a relief because you're kind of like, wow, like I don't have to do this shit anymore. So you kind of like
yeah,
just go, wow, okay, great, like that's cool. I'm really comfortable with that. But then you're like, I don't know what to do here. Like
right,
I've never been second fiddle to someone. I've always been the alpha in the relationship or the provider in the
yeah,
relationship. And to go to them being like, actually, maybe I'll be the stay-at-home mom. They're kind of like that's a bit
hmm,
weird. It's kind of like, and you kind of go, oh, do I want to do that? And you kind of start questioning yourself a bit, but it takes a bit of an adjustment, and I think it's also just not necessarily go from one extreme to another like a pendulum or something. I think it is
mm,
finding where that middle ground is. You still have your dreams and ambitions. Like, I have this real strong belief where you there's three parts you've got to fulfill. There's kind of you as an individual, there's
mm,
you as your relationship, and then when you get into having a family and things like that, you've got the collective of the family.
yeah,
And if you don't sort of give attention to all three of those,
mm,
it doesn't work. Like it's not working. You either feel like you're not being yourself because you're spending too much time in a relationship and with kids and stuff, and therefore you need to let your hair down. You lose yourself a little bit, or
mm,
you kind of become one in a relationship, and you just you're not getting your own time. You feel like you are literally at the behest of the other person, and therefore you. And don't get me wrong. In early starts of relationships, you kind of do that for the first couple of months, and it's fun because that's what you want to do. But you get to a
yeah,
point where you can't sustain that. You've got to still be you at some point. You've got to have
mm,
passions and dreams you want. There's needs that you have that may not be the same as your partner's. So that's got to happen. And I think with kids, it's an interesting one when you add that element in. It's kids take time and energy, and you kind of can't control that. So
hmm,
I think it probably affects women more than men, but they consume your first couple of years of them
yeah,
consumes you, so you lose yourself and your relationship quite quickly. You know,
yeah,
and I think that's quite hard. And I think trying to get back to yourself and kind of recognize you're still a person. You still have your own needs. Takes some doing. I think, and that's when that sort of family bit comes in play. Where I have to give some time to help my partner kind of still be herself. That might be looking after the kids. It might be actually letting
mm,
them go out with the girls and sort of helping them do that sort of thing, or dropping them off and do stuff. Dropping them off for a night out or something, whatever it is. But you've got that kind
yeah,
of like, those three still have to exist. And I noticed that when I'm with someone who doesn't kind of give enough to sort of one of those parts, you kind of see the impact it has in your relationship, and it kind of plays out, and they're not happy, and ultimately the
Mm,
relationship's not happy as well.
mm. And so I guess what I feel like with that is finding that balance, especially if you do have kids as well, because like you say that you can't control how that plays out because a kid is a kid
Yeah,
and shit happens. One day they're fine and they're like, leave me alone. The next day they're like falling out a tree and going to hospital and that's it. And they're sick or whatever and they need extra attention and all these things. And I guess you can't give 100% to each part?
no,
And is it almost like a kind of is it almost like it's one day you're giving 50% to one and it's constantly shifting. So something has to get more one day, but as long as you're aware
yeah,
that, you know,
yeah. I think it's definitely like that. I think it is. You know, you can't largely control that. There's times where you can't be yourself because you're busy with
mm,
work. Or you can't be yourself because your kids and your family need you. And so
mm,
therefore you can't give time to being yourself that day. But I think the key is to kind of recognize that, okay, look, I spent all week doing stuff for the kids. This weekend I'm going to try
mm,
to, get an hour to read a book for myself or watch a TV show I want to watch and be me, be me as an
mm,
individual. And then the same goes for the relationship. It's so easy in relationships, and I've had this quite a few relationships where life just takes over. Your relationship just ends up being you kind of cohabit, but you're
mm,
not really in a relationship. You're kind of not having
yeah,
those interactions you used to have. You're not really spending that quality time together. And that quality time might be hard to come by because you've got kids. It might be that
yeah,
largely you just can't make that time. But I think even just recognizing that it's imbalanced helps,
mm,
because
yeah,
then it kind of allows you both to kind of recognize, okay, look, we know we're not getting time together as a couple. So that's probably
mm,
why we're short with each other. That's probably why things aren't working the way they should be or like they used to, rather
yeah,
than constantly soul searching for why it's not working or it never used to be like that. And I
yeah,
think from that point, you start to then carve it out a little bit. And whatever that looks like, and it's different for everyone else. There's times where, for example, when I've had my business where trying to carve time out to spend with my partner was just, near impossible. The time you get would be like half an hour to an hour max,
mm,
which is pretty crap considering you went from, having full on date nights and, spending weekends away and stuff like that. But
mm,
that's just what it is, And then when you have kids, it's the same thing. But I think the fact that you even recognise that you need to give it something
yeah,
is a huge part of it. And I think my current partner as well. We've had periods where our careers, especially with COVID, actually, because we both work in healthcare and health tech.
mm,
Um, that was quite interesting because we went from being busy to being really busy, and it
mm,
was kind of like actually, just make sure that we kind of give each other just 30 minutes, like where we just have a drink together and we don't talk about work and we just like say, how you getting
mm,
on, check in with each other almost. And that in itself, I think, was worth every penny of it to just have that 30 minutes we could both switch off and feel like we're a couple. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have felt like that. And
mm,
I think it's at the time you don't recognize it, but I think you recognize it, in hindsight. You go, actually, that's how you kind of make the relationship work for those periods.
yeah. So, and by all means, I totally understand if you don't want to go down this route, but
Yeah, go for it.
having, talking about it's almost like basically you're saying communication is key. If you can both come to the table with your stuff, and that's working for you in this relationship, but as you say, you are going through a divorce, and what's that like? Because when you get married, and this is the thing, when you get married and you say those vows, and you're like forever till death do us part. And as I've said before, in another conversation, I watched my dad do it for the third time, and I was like, at what point do these mean fuck all? Like, at what point do you still believe that you've said that for the third time? Do you really believe it? I guess most people, when they say those vows, they mean them. They don't see that things are gonna change. But what I'm trying to get at, was it hard?
It's an interesting one. So it is hard. I pretty much near had a breakdown going through that whole
Mm,
process. Did, in fact, I'd say. It's an interesting one. I've seen two types of people do it. So, speaking from my own experience, I feel like at the time that I entered that relationship and chose to get married and got married and then had a child, I I did believe it.
mm,
I did believe that going, actually, this is a good person. I can see myself being with them. Um, and I've always wanted children. And, this is a good
mm,
person to have a child with. But there was something that was interesting. I guess my reference point for is this love
mm,
was just like based on what understanding do I have of whether this is love, whether this is the
yeah.
one. It's only when I then met the person that I am with now, and I was like, shit, that's what it should feel like.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh fuck, all that's wrong then, isn't it? And I'm like, what do I do now? Like, I clearly
Yeah.
don't love that person, and I knew I said it was forever, but like, how can I now pretend that that's all fine, And
Mm.
so it got to a point where I was a bit like, Jesus, like, I didn't know what love is until I kind of had it, and
And
it's
it
one of
like
those weird things.
slapped you in the face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did, and it's one of those where you kind of just it makes you realise that your reference point was all wrong for it. So I guess to answer your question a little bit, at the time you feel like you're right in doing that, and it
Mm,
feels right, and you feel committed to it, and you have genuinely believe that. But then when you
mm,
then realise that that's kind of moved on a bit, and you realise actually that's not what you thought love was, and you can have feelings for other people that clearly you shouldn't have if you love that person. Then
mm,
you're like, wow, okay, that's clearly not the case, then, is it? And your whole reference point is just changed, and that's when you then got to start untangling it all, which is hard. The other
mm,
bit is, and for me, I found this was, am I doing that because I'm not happy or not feeling acceptance? So knowing
mm.
previously that I did a lot of stuff for acceptance or people pleasing, or you
Yeah.
know, you know, it was exciting to kind of meet someone new. Would it end up in the same place?
Mm,
I kind of had to ask myself those questions. Going, look, I know I've had a tendency to do that previously. Is it just another situation like that? And
yeah.
it's only when I started to do that, I was like, no, actually, I would really genuinely miss this person if I wasn't with them. I was, I'm willing to going through a separation, divorce, and I've got a child, and I said I'd never do that for my daughter's sake. But I was like, I don't think I can honestly say that and stick by that if
Mm,
that means stepping away from my current partner. So I think it was an interesting one where I think that was the biggest eye opener. Going, shit, this is really like someone I love, and that's someone I clearly don't. Um, and then you got to navigate getting there.
yeah.
That in itself is a hard thing to do. But one thing I found interesting as well is I've met so many people since going through that process where I talk to people and they're kind of like, can't believe I've done what I've done. Can't believe I've
Mm,
got into that state and then kind of thrown it all away to then be with this one person. But they're also the same sort of people who often are kind of like you see are the sort of people who go and potentially, you know, on a boys' night out, potentially have an extramarital affair, or they're kind
mm-hmm.
of like, they flirt and they do that, and I'm a bit like, well, like you kind of on one side say you wouldn't do that, but I'm seeing actions and words and actions I recognise, right, that are kind of saying that you don't love that person. If you love them and respect them enough, you wouldn't do it like that.
Yeah. Do you think that, and I've seen this before, I've seen this a lot actually. Do you think that those that have an opinion, those that throw judgment, is because actually it threatens their way of doing, being, existence, how they think, how they operate?
Yeah, it's a good question. That I think you definitely see that. Yeah, I think they're trying to sort of keep that narrative or going in their own mind that actually, yeah, no, I'm still doing
Mm,
the right thing.
mm,
You definitely see that. I think the other thing you see that goes with that um, is they. I think they've probably kind of accepted that's how they live their life.
mm,
And when they see someone else do something different and then potentially be happier, they kind of go, shit, like starts maybe opening up the Pandora's box for them, going, actually,
Mm,
am I doing the right thing? Should I do the same? Does my partner think I'm going to do the same? Yeah, am I going to get,
mm,
questioned on it? I think they maybe have to justify their actions a little bit more themselves, and therefore they start projecting
yeah.
onto other people what their opinion is to try and protect that. And
Hmm.
it is interesting, that projection bit. I find quite a bit. The opinions either because they are either convincing themselves, or it's because they are not judge. I don't even see it as judgment, if I was to be honest, because I see it as you're trying to share what your view is, but you're quite dogmatic with
Mm,
it potentially. Is what I often
yeah.
find, and it is one of those where it's been like, what? Why are you doing that? Like, are you trying to convince me that I've done wrong?
Mm,
And that might be the case, right? But often I find it is them projecting their own emotions and feelings on it.
yeah.
And when I start to push back a little bit and say, no, why do you think that? What is it that you think I'm doing wrong? Or like, can you maybe put yourself in my shoes and understand why I'm doing this? Why I'm comfortable with
Mm,
it? And you start to see their sort of world crack a little bit. And I try
mm,
not to kind of do that too much, because it's not very nice to see the other person kind of have that kind of happen in front of them or on them. But you
mm,
do start to see, oh wow, okay, now you're showing your vulnerability more than you realise,
yeah.
just by projecting
Yeah.
yourself. And it's interesting when you do that. I had that the other week actually, where
Yeah.
someone did that, and they were telling me about how well their career's going, and how they've got a really nice home with a family home and stuff like that. And it was kind of just bragging about it, and I was just like, why are you bragging about it? Like, I think, and I kind of had the conversation saying, look, I've had my own business, do relatively well as well, you know, etc. In a good relationship, and he wasn't interested in hearing that. I'd be like, what? Okay, so you only want to project what you think you're doing well, and I'm a bit like, wow,
Mm,
okay. And then I started to probe it a little bit and be like, um, what is it you want me to get for this? Like, do you want me to go away
mm,
thinking, great, he's got his shit together? Like,
yeah.
is it you want me to think that, okay, he's doing better than I am, and therefore going to put me down? Like, what is it? And I was just a bit like, hmm. And then when I stopped interacting with it, because I was a bit like, there's other people at this party, right? I'm going to chat to other
Mm,
people. I think he really struggled, because nobody kind of took it on. Like nobody, everyone was
yeah.
kind of saw through it, and I was a bit like, oh wow, like this is why, like, his world in his mind, his world kind of must have crumbled a little bit, and I felt like, wow, that's interesting. Because he clearly isn't comfortable with himself. Yeah,
Yeah. That's always like, oh shit.
yeah.
Whoops. Yeah. And it's really interesting because talking about frame of reference and what love is, and now you're like, it's kind of like slapped you upside the head, and it's like, hey, no, this is what it is. And you come across as very quietly confident kind of person. And as I spoke to Pip about like boundaries, are you in a place now where you have and are able to communicate your boundaries and accept someone else's boundaries?
So boundaries are an interesting one. So Pip, for example, is always telling me I'm not very good with boundaries. Um, I think partially because I don't communicate them very well.
Mm,
Um, I think communication is definitely a common thread in a lot of my relationships. But the one thing I find interesting is, I think I've started to kind of be more comfortable with where my boundary is, and not be
mm,
too offended if someone has crossed them, and quietly kind of
mm,
walk away from that, rather than constantly have to reinforce them.
mm,
Unless it's a boundary that I need to reinforce. But if someone oversteps a boundary and upsets me, I'm not going to. Oh, well, I've got two options really. Either I can keep arguing and
mm,
reinforce that boundary, and kind of say, right, I have to kind of make them realise they've overstepped the mark, or I just kind of say it once,
mm,
and then just kind of follow through the action that I said that I would if they crossed that boundary. So, for example, I've had that with family where they've overstepped the mark with a boundary, and rather than constantly argue with it, because it's just bloody tiring, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just actually be like, look, you overstepped the mark, and I don't really want to talk to you, and
Mm.
I'll reach out to you when I'm ready, basically, and just be like that. And they find it really hard, but it's interesting how I found myself being more comfortable with my boundaries. That I don't have to
Hmm.
keep reasserting myself to kind of do them, and I can actually respect the fact that people overstep them, and I don't have to kind of actually give anything to that. The thing I learned with it, I think this just goes for everything that whether it's work or relationships. Like, if you're giving energy to something, you clearly care about it. Like, you care because
Yeah.
you want to put that energy in. And if you don't care, then you gotta ask yourself the question: why am I putting that energy into like getting angry by it? Why am I putting that energy
Mm.
into getting upset by it? Like, if I truly didn't care, I would just move on and focus on something else and put my energy
Yeah.
somewhere else. And I found that by doing that, I felt more comfortable with those boundaries. So even if I haven't set it right or communicated properly, then I can correct that by just saying, actually, you've overstepped the boundary, and tell them why. But I equally can just leave it and go, well, actually, I've told them 3 times now as well, and they keep
Mm.
doing it. I don't have to keep playing this game with everyone. And it's
Mm.
huge weight off shoulders to kind of not have to worry about those boundaries so much.
Yeah.
Um,
And what's that like with, with your relationship with Pip, who again has said that she's very much into boundaries and this is what she wants? How does that work when two people have boundaries? You
yeah,
hope that they both are in the same area, in the same space. How does that work if, I'm not saying that you have had boundaries like or kind of moments where they don't overlap, but how do you navigate that? Especially as at the moment, boundaries is a fucking buzzword. Everybody's talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
boundaries and my boundary. You should have boundaries and you should set boundaries. But what is missing from the narrative is how do you navigate that when you're in a relationship where you're both communicating your boundaries and you both clearly love each other and
Mm.
want to be in that space together, but maybe they're slightly different.
Do you know what? I think you're right with the buzzword of boundaries for sure. Um,
Mm,
Everything seems about setting your boundaries, being clear with it. And you know what? I think that's bullshit. I think
yeah,
you kind of set these boundaries, but often you don't know what your boundary is yet because you might not even be comfortable with how you feel about something. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can
yeah,
you set a boundary if you don't even know yourself how you feel about that
mm,
particular issue or that particular area of it? Like, so I think trying to just force everyone to set boundaries, I think is a bit false. I mean, you can set one and then acknowledge it's a bit fluid.
mm,
Um, I think the other bit is setting a boundary and then how you feel about it. I think a lot of people almost set it to justify how they feel about something. I feel angry, right,
hmm,
because you crossed this line. Well, maybe we should look at why you feel angry. Like, what is it that
hmm,
is actually making you angry?
yeah,
Because that's the real issue. You're doing this to stop yourself feeling angry, and we're setting boundaries, and you still feel angry. So clearly, maybe it's the anger,
yeah,
And I think I've definitely had that with Pip, where we set boundaries with each other, and they kind of get crossed, either slightly or seriously or whatever. But the one thing I find really interesting is it's quite hard to then have a conversation after about how does that make you feel?
mm,
Like, why did I react the way I did when they crossed that boundary? Like,
mm,
is it because maybe I've overreacted, more sensitive for whatever reason,
mm,
rather than it being the actual boundary itself? That could be a thing.
yeah,
And often I find it's always in there. It's always in those little small things of um, we set all these boundaries, but actually it's about almost like a defense mechanism. I've put that in place for a reason. And I've got to ask myself the question, why did I set that boundary and why am I upset when
mm,
someone crosses it?
hmm,
And that is usually where the actual root issue is. And if you can master that bit, it
yeah,
almost doesn't matter about the other bit at all.
yeah,
Whereas you could argue till the cows come home on that boundary it being crossed. And the other person
mm,
may never see it as well. That's the other bit as well. Like, you're assuming the other person acknowledges that boundary, like you said, and it's just different. They may, Pip, for example, may be really comfortable with certain bits that I'm not, and therefore I've set a really rigid boundary for her,
mm,
and she's just like trampled all over it because she just doesn't see that boundary at all, and vice versa. I know we've done it to each other for sure. on different areas. And it's interesting how it's really hard to then have a conversation about why we feel the way we do about that boundary being crossed. And that's where our communication breaks down, if I was to be honest. It's
Mm,
when that's happened and we both feel kind of triggered a little bit.
mm.
And we're not really able to communicate in that time. It takes a bit of cooling down period to get there.
So it's in the why. It's almost like, here's my boundaries, but actually, this is actually where it comes from,
Yeah,
rather than just like, these are my boundaries. I saw it on a Twitter article.
yeah.
Like, this is what I don't want, and this is what I want. And then it's like, okay, but that's only going to work if there's a why,
Well, look,
if there's a
we talked
story.
about jealousy earlier, right? Here's a good example of
Yeah.
this. I set a boundary. I don't want you to do this sort of thing because it kind of puts in a position where guys will come at her and
Mm,
kind of makes me feel really vulnerable with our relationship, maybe. And first of all, that boundary's been set is kind of a weird one because it's been like, well, I'm setting it because I'm insecure.
mm-hmm,
If I just set that boundary, it seems crazy. And she's like, why are you trying to hold me back? Why,
mm,
also, do you not trust me? And, starts to call the question. And I often say to her, it's not that I don't trust you, it's I don't trust the other people. Also, I feel vulnerable. It's actually
mm,
got, and this is the irony of it, it's actually got nothing to do with whether I trust you or not. I actually do trust you. It's my insecurity. And I know it's my insecurity. I just don't know how to deal with it right now. And I know I should not feel that uncomfortable with it, but I do.
yeah.
And therefore, just acknowledging that it's because of that kind of makes her realize, why it's an issue for me, and maybe we could do things differently to help support that and not trigger that insecurity. But equally, it might be just look, I'm working on it. It's just I'm not there right now. I need another 3-4 months of just kind of working through that myself and to be more
Mm,
comfortable in my own skin, and that's okay. But that so therefore the boundary seems largely pointless. It's just actually having that dialogue. It does allow you to have that dialogue of why that boundary is
mm,
set. What's the real motive behind it? Rather than
yeah.
kind of using that to hide behind, because that's often what you do, right? You hide behind that boundary,
Yeah.
and to be fair, like, a lot of those boundaries are odd ones where there'll be boundaries because they are, I feel uncomfortable with certain things because of my childhood. You know,
Hmm.
how the hell would Pip know that? She's got
Yeah.
no context for that. So
Yeah.
therefore, for her, it's a bit like, well, why are you setting this really odd boundary? Let alone expecting her to then live by that or
Yeah.
honor that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy, and like what you're saying makes just makes sense. And I know for some people they're just like, oh fuck. But when you say that, like kind of like it could be something from your childhood. What is the difference between whether you can answer this, like what you thought love was then to how love feels now that now it's like I said, now it's punch in the face.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Is there a difference, or is it actually you finally found what you thought love was when you were a kid?
No, no. I think
I love that. No, no.
it's a hard one to articulate, and it's often
Mm,
one that I try to articulate to people actually because obviously I've had to explain why I've kind of made the life choice I had, especially when it comes to the
mm,
divorce and separation, to be with my current partner. And yeah, they sometimes get it and don't get it. But
mm,
ultimately, I think I thought I had a view of what love would be, that kind of Disney
mm,
fantasy.
mm,
Realised it isn't that, and then kind of thought, well, I'm compromising. Like, can I get as close to that as possible? And therefore, I found a good person. You know, I'm not going to get to the point where I'm, get frustrated with her. I can settle down with her. Got married. Then I met someone who I love, and I was like, oh, actually, like I feel I want to spend time with this person. I actually, like, find them attractive. I want to spend time with them. Got to know them better. I feel I can be myself, and that was a
mm,
big thing. I can actually share how I feel and not worried about being judged by it. I can put it out there
mm.
and feel like actually, and like it is a safe space to do it. And whereas I think in my previous relationship I couldn't do that, and so I realised actually that's a fundamental flaw in it, and I've realised that's clearly what love must be, and it also allows you to grow it. The
Mm,
fact you can be yourself with someone and not have to worry about ramifications of what you say, do, and kind of just put it out there if you're feeling vulnerable and still feel safe. Like that's fucking huge. And yeah, and I found someone I can do that with. And so I think I have realised that you need, like, it has to be someone who can make you feel safe and secure and get you, like,
Mm.
and equally you get them. One thing that I would say that's interesting is, doesn't mean it'll be an easy relationship.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing that I found like a real mind blowing head fuck. It's kind of like I found the person I love. Like, even when I'm angry at them, I still love them. Like, I just, I still want to hug them after I've,
Mm.
got pissed off with them. But fuck me, it's hard work. Like,
Mm.
it's not, I've been with people, it's just easier being in a relationship with them, but there's just not that love. It's kind of,
Mm.
as a passive person, it's kind of, you could just keep going like that for 40 years, but you won't really feel fulfilled or happy. But it's
Mm.
easier.
Yeah.
I think with Pip, it's definitely a harder relationship to be in because we clash a lot. We're quite similar. We probably why we understand each other, why we can share things so openly.
Mm.
But it does feel like you kind of, we can be more open as a result of that. But equally, we're still supporting each other, discover each other, like ourselves as well, and that
Mm.
journey and our relationship more. And that then means that sometimes there's days where we just can't communicate properly. Maybe we try
Yeah.
to and it just doesn't land with each other, or maybe you call the other person out for, you're annoyed with that boundary, but actually, is it because you've got the issue? Is it because you're insecure? And to
Mm.
be able to say that, it could be greeted with a massive defensive kind of reaction, going, "No, it's not me. It's
Yeah.
definitely you."
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it could be actually, "Oh yeah, maybe it is." But it depends on what state of mind you're in to receive that information. I think um, I'm having to learn for the first time about how I deliver and communicate
Yeah.
what I see a lot more, whereas before I probably didn't think about it so much.
Mm.
Um,
There's it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's almost like a duality that you have to come to accept, that you can actually love someone while also be like absolutely be really fucked off with them,
yeah,
and maybe even in a way kind of like hate something that's happened,
yeah,
but you still love them. And I wonder if that duality is just something that people can't quite get their heads around, that you can be both, that you
yeah.
can
I
have.
think that's it. I think that's it. You nail on the head there. It's both, isn't it? It's on a scale. Love and hate's on a scale, right? And it's
Mm.
kind of like they could both coexist, and they could swing across that scale like
Mm.
instantly almost. But the one thing I found is at the end of it, I still go, yeah, but I'm still willing to work at that. Yeah, if
Mm.
it didn't work today, well, I'm still going to work on that tomorrow because I still love this person. Whereas I think
Mm.
previously in relationships, I would have kind of got to a point where I'm like, enough's enough. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a tolerance level. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
know now there isn't a tolerance level. Like, it's just like I'm just going to keep going until it works, and if it never works, then I'm also okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's changed, because you
Mm.
then realise actually I'm happy to live like this, even if it's not perfect, and it still makes me happy, and actually I still love that person.
Mm.
Whereas I think before, there'd definitely be sort of red lines where, you know, if if it's not as exciting anymore, right? Okay, yeah, probably out of the relationship. If there's, things, if we don't, spend time together, like, yeah, I'm out of the relationship. There'd definitely be a point where I'd be like, okay, enough's enough. I'd walk away. Whereas I don't find that now. There's no walk away point, which is
Yeah.
scary in itself, I might add.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up now. Now, something that with everybody that I've had a conversation with, even those that don't know me and I don't know them, always put it back out there because I know that I'm the one asking the questions. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, what is it you think is the most important thing about love?
The most important thing about
Yeah,
love,
to you.
having had these, to be honest, having had these conversations, but knowing probably before that anyway, because of what I yearn for in a relationship that I have yet to experience. And I think this goes all the way back to childhood anyway, is something that you actually highlighted, which is a feeling of safety,
Hmm.
to be free in who you are and how you express yourself. Not that, to express yourself and be a dick, but there's a level of safety to be vulnerable, to be that nerdy person. You want to geek out on something, you want to do your kitchen dance, and also just be vulnerable in those moments where you need to grieve something or be
Yeah,
scared, or and have that safe space, and that person being able to create that safe space. So I think safety for me is something that I think will be, as I look for it, will be a huge thing.
yeah. No, it's interesting because yeah, I didn't realize how important it is, um, and also what you think safety is. Yeah,
Mm,
you have like an impression of what that safety looks like, but safety might mean someone allows you to push your buttons a little bit. It kind of makes you feel a
mm,
bit unstable
yeah,
to allow you to
challenge
then
you.
like open up, and then you feel
Hmm.
safety. Like, oh shit, like that's what safety is. I didn't realize that,
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
it could, before it would have been safety is like someone who just like allows me not to talk about it. So
Yeah, no, but I think it's like you've said about quite a few things. It's a spectrum of one day that safety is being allowed to just be absolutely mental, and the next day it's allowing, like, knowing that they can push your buttons, but there's safety in knowing that if you walk away because you need space, that you can come back again.
yeah,
That you can, like, be like, can't do this. Need some time to work this one out, and knowing that they're still going to be there. It's not like, I think I've lived in a very much, and as my therapist would have said, is like a very black and white, very in or out.
yeah,
You can only be one or the other, and again, going back to that duality of yeah, say I think, yeah, safety is huge, and I have a feeling that that is going to feel incredibly scary, but incredible at the same time.
yeah. I feel like that now. It's kind of like I said, it's one of the hardest relationships I've been in because of
Mm,
that uncomfortability sometimes, but you kind of caught every time by that safety that okay, it's uncomfortable, but maybe I just share that I'm uncomfortable. Like
mm,
shit, like I don't need to have an answer right now. I don't need, and that's kind of the safety kick in, that you can do that and still, it'll be okay, or you'll have a second chance to have that conversation or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at the moment. That's what I've been. That's always been at the back of my mind for quite some time. So who knows?
nice,
Who
nice.
knows? But honestly, Ash, thank you so much. This has been really, really good. Absolutely blow my stereotypes of men away. Thank you.
No problem.
And yeah, thank you very much.
No,
I
thanks
can't
for
wait
having
for
us.
people to hear
It's
this.
been fun. I hope it allows other guys to open up a bit more about it and stuff. So.
Cheers.